Today, we're diving into a Supreme Court case that gets to the heart of a huge question. When two people tell two totally different stories, who gets to decide what the truth is? Let's break down Purtu v. Richards. Okay, so let's just jump right in. This case really forces us to look at a core issue in our entire justice system. When you have a situation where the stories are in direct conflict, who makes the call on credibility? Is it a single judge, or is it a jury of our peers? And this slide, well, it lays out the conflict perfectly. On one side, you've got an inmate, Kyle Richards, who's making some incredibly serious allegations of abuse, of retaliation, the whole shebang. And on the other side, a prison employee, Thomas Purtu, who flatly denies everything. It's the classic he said, she said scenario. So, whose job is it to untangle this mess? That's the question that went all the way to the top. Now, to really get what's at stake here, we have to understand this massive legal wall that prisoners face when they try to sue. It's something called the exhaustion rule, and, you'll see, it creates a serious dilemma. So this law is the Prison Litigation Reform Act, or PLRA for short, and it has this one super important rule known as the exhaustion requirement. The idea is to let the prison system get the first crack at solving its own problems internally, before things blow up and land in federal court. This is how it's supposed to work, right? A nice, orderly process. But what happens if somebody decides to just break the chain? According to Kyle Richards, that is exactly what happened. He claimed that Thomas Purtu, the very person he was filing a complaint about, was destroying his grievance forms, making it literally impossible for him to get past step 2. I mean, think about it. Richards was completely trapped in this legal paradox. To get his day in court, he had to play by the prison's rules. But the very person he was trying to report was allegedly the one blocking him from even playing the game. It is the perfect definition of a catch-22. So this impossible situation, it didn't just stay inside the prison walls. Nope. It escalated into a major legal battle in the federal courts, and it brought up this fundamental conflict. What's the proper role of a judge, and what's the proper role of a jury? So the case starts its climb up the judicial ladder. First, a district court judge listens to the evidence and basically says, you know what? I don't find this story credible. Boom, case dismissed. But then the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals steps in and says, whoa, not so fast. They argued that because the question of whether he followed the process was so tangled up with his actual claim of retaliation, the Seventh Amendment right to a jury trial had to apply. This disagreement between the lower courts is what set the stage for the big showdown at the Supreme Court. So, the big question is, how did the highest court in the land resolve this conflict? Let's get right to the final ruling. And wow, the decision was razor thin, a 5-4 split. That tells you everything you need to know about how tough this call was. The justices themselves were clearly divided, which just highlights the powerful competing values that are at play in our legal system. And here it is, the final outcome. The Supreme Court sided with Richards. They ruled that when a procedural question, like exhaustion, is all mixed up with the actual substance of the case, the plaintiff gets to have a jury decide the facts. Okay, so what was the thinking behind that? Why did the majority believe this was a job for the jury? Understanding their logic is absolutely key to seeing the real impact of this ruling. The majority's approach here was really interesting. They kind of sidestepped making a huge constitutional ruling. Instead, Chief Justice Roberts, who wrote the opinion, zeroed in on the text of the law itself. He pointed out that the PLAR is silent. It doesn't say who should decide these disputes. And because of that silence, he argued, the court should fall back on the usual practice. And in American law, what's the usual practice? Letting juries decide critical fights over the facts. This slide just lays out the disagreement perfectly. You have the majority saying that silence in a law means we stick to tradition, and our tradition protects the role of the jury. But the dissent, led by Justice Barrett, saw it from the complete opposite angle. They argued that if the law is silent, it means Congress did not create a right to a jury trial for this specific issue. They were worried the court's ruling would undermine the whole point of the PLRA, which was to efficiently screen out lawsuits before they ever get to trial. All right, so let's zoom out a bit. What are the real-world consequences of this 5-4 decision? Why does this case matter beyond just the courtroom walls? At the end of the day, this ruling is a major reinforcement of the jury's power. It establishes that when a person's credibility is the central issue for both the procedure and the case itself, that question has to be decided by a jury in a full trial. It can't just be dismissed prematurely by a judge. It's a really powerful statement about what access to justice actually means. And that brings us to a final, pretty provocative question. The dissent was concerned with efficiency, with streamlining the court system, but the majority prioritized the foundational role of the jury. This case perfectly captures that constant tug-of-war between speed and fundamental rights, a tension that is going to continue to shape our entire legal system for a long, long time. And before we go, just a quick reminder, this is for entertainment and educational purposes only. This is not legal advice.